Picture a winter night in Europe right after World War II. The kind of cold that creeps into your bones and doesn't leave. A mother pulls her child close, wrapping him in a coat that used to fit someone else. The streetlights are weak. The buildings are scarred. And in a small kitchen there's one question that matters more than politics, more than ideology, more than speeches. Do we have enough to eat tomorrow? Now imagine, in the middle of that darkness, an American official arrives with a promise. We'll help you rebuild. To most people, that sounds like pure kindness, a lifeline, a heroic chapter of history. But here's the question. Nobody likes to ask out loud, what if that help was also a deal? One that quietly made Europe dependent on American dollars for generations. And I don't mean dependence like a cartoon villain forcing chains on people. I mean something far more realistic, something quieter. The kind of dependence that forms when a whole world rebuilds, using one currency, one financial system, one set of rules. Stay with me because by the end of this documentary you're going to understand how aid can become a system and how that system can still shape your life today, whether you live in Texas or in France, whether your paycheck is in dollars or euros. This story matters right now because most of us think history is something that happened back then, but money systems don't vanish. They keep running, like old plumbing hidden behind the walls. You don't see it, you don't think about it until something breaks, until the water stops, until your bill doubles. And if you don't understand how the plumbing works, you can't explain why one country's interest rates can shake the whole world, why certain currencies dominate global trade, and why some places get rescued faster during financial crises. Today we're talking about the Marshall Plan, officially the European Recovery Program. Historical records show it ran from 1948 to 1952 and helped rebuild European economies after the war. That part is real, but the deeper question is, what kind of world did it build financially? Because when you help someone rebuild their house, you're not just giving them lumber, you're also shaping the wiring, the pipes, and the locks. And decades later, that hidden infrastructure decides who has power when the lights flicker. So let's walk through this like normal people. No fancy economics, just human reality, clear logic, and the truth hiding in plain sight. After the war, Europe wasn't just damaged, it was stuck. Factories were wrecked. Ports and railroads were broken. Farms struggled. Cities were in rubble. People were exhausted. And even when the will to rebuild was there, Europe hit a brutal wall. You can't rebuild without imports. You need fuel to power industry. You need machines to restart factories. You need wheat, medicine, steel, parts. And here's the problem. In that era, the world's most important supplier of those essentials was the United States. But you can't buy from the United States if you can't pay. And to pay in global trade, you needed dollars. This is what people mean by a dollar shortage. It's simple. Europe needed goods but didn't have enough dollars to import them. And that created fear. Not just economic fear, human fear. When people can't heat homes, when shelves are empty, when jobs disappear, politics turns angry fast. Extremism starts to look reasonable to people who are desperate. That's not a lecture, that's just what history shows again and again. So the US steps in with the Marshall Plan. And at a human level, it's hard not to feel relief. Supplies arrive, factories restart, trade begins moving again. People start seeing light at the end of the tunnel. But here's the key idea. When you solve a crisis using a specific currency, you often build long-term dependence on that currency. It's like this. Imagine your neighbor is starving, and you help them by giving them food. That's good. That matters. But what if you only accept payment in one special kind of token that only you can print? Even if you don't demand payment right away, you've still created a new reality. In the future, if they want to keep trading, they'll need your tokens. That's what makes this story complicated and, honestly, emotional. Because it's not about denying help. It's about understanding the fine print of how the world was rebuilt. In school, the Marshall Plan is often framed as a selfless rescue. And yes, Europe truly needed help. That part is not up for debate. But there's another side that's also real. The United States had powerful reasons to do it. One argument, widely discussed by historians and economic analysts, is that America came out of the war with huge industrial capacity. The US was producing at a scale the world hadn't seen before. And after wartime production, countries worry about falling demand. They worry about jobs, they worry about recession, they worry about political instability. A stable, rebuilding Europe could become a customer, a partner, and a barrier against Soviet influence. So this is not a movie villain story. It's more human than that. It's a story of two truths happening at once. Europe needed a lifeline, and the US wanted a world where trade moved, allies stayed stable, and American leadership stayed strong. That's where the scam framing comes in. Not fake aid, but aid with architecture. Not just money. A system. Now let's get concrete, because this is where people get lost. The Marshall Plan. Again, officially, the European Recovery Program from 1948 to 1952 provided support through grants, loans, and shipments of critical goods. It helped restart production and stabilize societies. But here's the part most people miss. The plan didn't just drop cash in a box and walk away. A lot of that aid worked like an engine, a circular engine. The US provides support. European countries use that support to import essential goods, often from the US. Those goods help restart production. Production helps rebuild society. And rebuilding creates trade again. It's not evil. It's not charity either. It's strategy. And inside that engine, there's a mechanism that matters: counterpart funds. Here's the plain language version. Imagine a ship arrives with supplies. Those supplies get sold inside the receiving country. The local money collected from those sales doesn't just disappear. It goes into a special pool, a counterpart fund meant for rebuilding, infrastructure, industry, stabilization. On paper, that's smart. It creates local investment funds from imported goods. But critics point out the leverage point: who influences how that pooled money gets used. In many cases, spending priorities were shaped through US separate oversight and planning frameworks, not always with a threat, not always loudly, often simply through the reality that the money, the supplies, and the recovery path were connected to US guidance. So the strings weren't always visible. They weren't always a demand. They were often a steering wheel. And when you hold the steering wheel during a rebuild, you influence the road. Now, zoom out, because the Marshall Plan didn't happen in a vacuum. It landed in a world shaped by the post-war financial order, often described through Bretton Woods, where the dollar sat at the center of the system and many other currencies were tied to it. You don't have to memorize the rules. Here's the emotional truth. When the world rebuilds around one currency, that currency becomes more than money. It becomes power, because it becomes the language of trade, reserves, and emergency survival. It's like oxygen. Most days you don't think about it. But in a crisis, whoever controls the oxygen controls life. So even after Marshall aid ended, the need for dollars didn't end. It became structural. Like building a house where every room uses one special kind of electricity. You can renovate the furniture. You can repaint the walls. You can change the curtains. But you still need that same power grid to keep the house alive. After 1952, Europe didn't stay poor. Europe recovered, Europe grew, new industries rose, trade expanded, standards of living improved. But dependence didn't disappear, it changed form. Instead of needing shipments, economies needed credit liquidity, funding, access to the world's main currency for trade and finance. This is where people talk about Eurodollar markets. Here's what that means. In one clean sentence, it's dollars circulating outside the United States through global banks and finance. They're still dollars, still tied to US policy and USS policy. Confidence, even if they're used in London, Frankfurt, or Paris. Then comes a turning moment that matters to this story, 1971, when President Nixon ended the dollar's direct link to gold. Now, historians debate what that meant long-term. But here's the simple point that fits our story. When the gold link ended, the world didn't stop relying on the dollar. In many ways, it relied on it even more, because the anchor changed. Before, the promise behind the dollar was connected to a physical metal. Something you could point to, something that felt solid, even if most people never touched it. After 1971, the anchor became something else. Trust in the American system itself, its institutions, its central bank, its markets, and its rules. And here's what that means in plain English. If the world's main currency is anchored to one country's credibility, then global stability starts depending on how that country manages its money, its banking system, and its financial plumbing. So the shift wasn't just a technical change. It was a deeper kind of dependence. Not dependence on a pile of gold, dependence on a system managed, protected, and ultimately controlled by one country. And by the time that shift happened, the dollar-centered infrastructure was already deeply in place. Trade habits, reserve habits, banking habits. The world had already built its financial house with dollar wiring, so Europe wasn't forced in one dramatic moment. It was pulled in over decades through trade needs, banking networks, and crisis management. That's how dependence usually happens in real life, not with chains, with convenience. Now, we hit the moment where the truth becomes unavoidable, the turning point. Because you can debate history forever. You can argue intentions. You can argue whether the plan was morally good or strategically smart. But crises don't care about your opinions. Crises reveal the plumbing. Here's the reality. In global financial stress, everyone suddenly wants dollars. Even if you're a strong economy, if your banks and companies owe dollars or need dollars for trade, fuel, imports, contracts, you can hit a wall when dollar funding dries up. And this is where swap lines enter the story. A swap line is a tool where the US Federal Reserve can provide dollars to allied central banks to keep markets from freezing. Think of it like an emergency oxygen tank. When the world panics, the question becomes, who can create the dollars the world needs most? That's the turning point, because it shows the system isn't just history, it's alive. And in extreme moments, stability can depend on access to US dollar liquidity. And for regular people, this matters because when systems freeze, it's not banks that suffer first. It's jobs, it's mortgages, it's pensions, it's wages. It's small businesses. If you've ever watched a friend lose work during a downturn, you know what I mean. It's not theoretical. It's a family at the kitchen table doing math with fear in their chest. Now let's bring it down to your kitchen table. Right now, your life is touched by global dollar conditions. In the USS, it can show up in interest rates, market swings, and how fast credit tightens. One central bank decision can ripple into mortgage rates, car loans, business financing, and the mood of the entire economy. In Europe, the same dollar system can show up as funding stress in banks, pressuring currency markets, and the price of imports, especially energy and commodities, which are often priced globally in dollars. You might not care about the term Eurodollars, but you care when your mortgage payment jumps, your retirement account drops, or your grocery bill climbs after a currency shock. This is why people call it addiction, even though it's not addiction like a personal weakness. It's addiction like a system built around one fuel source. If the world runs on dollar fuel, you can build a beautiful car. But you still need access to the fuel. Now we need to be balanced here. Was the Marshall Plan worth it for Europe? Many would say yes, because it helped rebuild and stabilize. Was it also good for the U.S.? Yes, because it strengthened allies, expanded trade, and reinforced the dollar's role. So the emotional truth is, it helped people survive and rebuild, and it also reinforced a power structure. Both can be true. And if you only teach one side, you're not teaching history, you're teaching a bedtime story. Now, let's talk about the modern invisible leash idea, carefully, without turning it into a rant. In the 2020s, the dollar-centered system isn't just about paper bills. It's about financial plumbing, payments, global banking, and crisis backstops. In plain terms, if a country is deeply connected to dollar finance, it may feel constraints during political disagreements, trade disputes, or sanctions risk. That doesn't mean every disagreement becomes financial punishment. It means the structure can limit options. It's like living in an apartment building where someone else controls the boiler room. Most of the time, you don't notice. But if you get into a conflict, you suddenly realize you don't own the heating system. And for everyday people, the biggest issue isn't politics. It's stability. Because stability decides whether your paycheck buys the same groceries next month. Now, I want to shift into what this means for you practically, because this channel is simple financial insight. We don't just learn history to feel smart, we learn it to live better. Here's a realistic checklist you can actually use. No fantasies, no hype. Step 1. Build a cash buffer. If the system tightens, people with no cushion get forced into bad decisions. They borrow at high interest, they sell investments at the worst time, they take desperate jobs that burn them out. So aim for a basic emergency fund. Not perfection, not a magic number, just a buffer that gives you time. Step 2. Reduce rate shock risk. If you have variable rate debt, understand your worst case payment. When rates rise, variable payments can rise fast. Fixed rate can be safer, but sometimes it costs more upfront. Trade-off: paying for stability can feel expensive, but instability can be worse. Step 3. Diversify simply. Don't bet your entire future on one asset, one industry, or one country. For many people, broad, low-cost index funds can be a starting point because they spread risk across many companies. Trade-offs: markets can drop hard, fees matter, taxes matter, and diversified doesn't mean safe tomorrow. It means you're less likely to be wiped out by one single failure. Step 4. Watch fees and scams like a hawk. In uncertain times, scam offers explode. Guaranteed returns. Secret currency plays, private credit miracles. Risk-free profits. If it sounds too perfect, it usually is. Always check who is regulated, always read fee disclosures, always be suspicious of pressure tactics. Step 5. Build resilience beyond money. This is the part people skip, and it's the part that saves people when the world gets rough. Skills matter. Community matters. Relationships matter. A side skill that can bring in income, a supportive network, the ability to adapt. Those things do not show up on a bank statement, but they can be the difference between panic and stability. Quick disclaimer, and I mean this sincerely, this is education, not personal advice. Talk to a qualified professional for decisions specific to you. Now let me give you my personal analysis, clearly labeled as opinion. In my experience watching money systems, the Marshall Plan was both true help and smart strategy. It tends to be how major powers operate. They do something beneficial, but they do it in a way that reinforces their position. My read is that calling it a scam is emotionally accurate. For one reason, most people were taught the story as pure generosity, not as long-term design. The public story is often, America saved Europe. The fuller story is, America helped rebuild Europe in a way that reinforced a dollar-centered order. And that order has benefits. It can create stability. It can create predictable rules. It can make crisis response faster for certain allies. But it also has a cost. It concentrates power in the hands of whoever controls the core currency and the key backstops. So the question isn't, was it evil? The real question is, what did Europe pay for stability? And if the payment was long-term reliance on US dollar credit and dollar plumbing, then the modern world makes more sense, especially during crises. And here's something that matters for Americans too. Sometimes people hear dollar dominance and they think it's only good for the US. It can bring advantages, yes, but it also brings responsibility and pressure. When your currency is the center, your policies ripple outward. That can create political stress and global tension. It's not a free lunch. That's why this topic is not about cheering for one side. It's about understanding reality so you can protect your own life. So let's land this plane. Here's the core message. The Marshall Plan wasn't just money. It was a blueprint. It helped rebuild Europe, and it helped build a world where the dollar became the center of gravity. And when the dollar is the gravity, everyone's economy feels the pull, Americans and Europeans included. If this documentary changed how you see history, please like and subscribe, because we do simple, clear money truth on this channel without the noise. And I want to hear from you in the comments which part surprised you most. The aid with a steering wheel, the 1971 shift, or the crisis turning point where everyone suddenly needs dollars. Tell me what shocked you, and tell me what topic you want next.